Hey there! Today I'm going to talk about a vintage fountain pen. So those of you who are interested in modern pens only can safely skip this video, because I won't talk about a modern pen. I will talk about a vintage-ish pen, which is actually made somewhere between 1960 and 1970, so it's not that vintage. It can be used as a writer, this pen, and that's why I got it. So, today I will talk about the Montblanc 22. I have already reviewed one vintage pen, which was the Montblanc 220. So that's like 220. This is just 22. In fact, I have got two, but I will only review this one. They're identical apart from one detail. This one has an oblique broad nib and the other has a medium nib. I'll give you a writing demonstration of the oblique broad nib only because that's a more interesting nib. But before we get to that, let's first talk about the pen. What is interesting about this pen? What do I like? What do I don't like? Well, it's a nice pen. It's a nice little pen. It's not that large. Definitely not as large as the Meisterstück pens from Montblanc. But I think it's interesting. And this is one of the cheaper pens Montblanc used to make in the 60s. So don't expect extremely, richly decorated stuff, but I do think it's nice. Some gilded highlights. Let's take a look at the cap. Of course, the cap has the white star, the Montblanc logo. It has, as I said, a gilded clip. It has these two nice gilded rings on the cap. And on the cap it says Montblanc number 22. So there is no mistake there. Then it is a piston filler. So I'll show you the nib in a second. That means you can unscrew this end cap. I'll be a little careful there. I don't want anything to snap off. And then a piston moves up and down in the pen and sucks this part full of ink. Now, the good thing about this pen is that it has an ink window, which is the blue thing you can see in there. As you can sort of see, you can see my finger through it, so you can see how much ink is still in there, which is very useful because it's a piston filler. You cannot just open it and see how much is left in the cartridge or the converter. Okay, so a nice ink window, another two gilded rings. And then we have the section. The section is smooth plastic, very tapered, but in a nice way, I think. I think this looks fairly sophisticated. And the nib is sort of hooded to the extent that this nib does not stick out as is usually the case. Here's another more modern pen, so this would be a regular nib, right? And you can see the difference here. So the nib on the Montblanc is a little different. And I kind of like that. I kind of like this design. What you can also see is that although this is an oblique broad nib, it's not nearly as broad as we would call any nib broad. That's a grammatically weird sentence. It's not as broad as a modern nib would be if it would be broad. As I just told you, it's an oblique, which in this case it's a left oblique. The left side is sort of cut at a slanted angle, so for those of you not familiar, whereas a regular nib would be rounded and an italic would be flat, this nib is cut like that, which gives you a very nice amount of line variation, which I'll demonstrate in the writing samples later on. Okay, the body is plastic, it's nothing fancy, but this pen was in excellent condition, so I was very pleased. There are no big scratches or anything, so it still looks very, very nicely. Okay, a few words about the nib. The nib is 14 karat gold, because in the good old days even the cheaper pens came with gold nibs, I think. Very nice. This is a nice nib. As I said, it's not as broad as I expected it to be, but it's sweet. It's slightly flexible, it's smooth. It gives a really nice line variation because of both the obliqueness and the slight flexing that it has. So, very nice. One minor issue I have is that you may be able to see some fins there. Fins is not the right word. Excuse me. You can see some sort of gills there, I would call it, which are part of the feed. And sometimes when I write with this, my hand slips down a little and I touch these things and you get ink on your finger. So the feed is kind of open up over there, which is a bit odd. But still, I think it's a nice design and I really like using it. So just to give you an idea, here we have the oblique broad, here we have the medium nib. As you can see, the medium nib appears, the medium nib, right, that's this one, seems to be a little taller. And now you can really see the obliqueness of that nib. So, two nice pens. Happy I was able to get them. I prefer the oblique nib, but the other nib is nice too. It's a bit harder, a bit more like a nail. But okay, I mean, I can live with that. So, two nice Montblancs. I think I'll give you a writing demonstration next, and that's it. So I hope this was useful, and I'll see you later. Bye bye. Okay, here we go. Writing with the Montblanc 22. Now, I also have a review on YouTube of the Montblanc 220, but that's a different pen, so let's not confuse the two. This is the Montblanc 22, and I give you this demonstration with the oblique broad nib. I'll forget about the medium nib for now. It's nice enough, but I think this one gives a little bit more spectacular results. So here we go. Montblanc 22. The ink is a Mars blue, which I always consider to be a bit of a vintage looking ink. It's a very simple blue, and I think that kind of fits the vintage-ish pen. Okay, so a couple of interesting things. Let's do some writing. For starters, this is an oblique broad nib, but as you can see, it's not that broad. Sure, it gives the oblique coolness in line variation, but I think modern day nibs are a lot broader than this one. So that's an interesting historical thing to see, that in the old days what was considered broad is fairly fine by today's standards. I mean, a line like this is, I think, fine or medium at best, but not broad at all. Now, of course, it is oblique, so you get this line variation. Moving like this will give you narrow lines. Moving like that will give you much broader lines. And you can combine that a little bit into some type of copperplate-ish line variation style writing. Now, I cannot do full-blown copperplate, but if you combine this with some flexibility of the nib, you see that? That's really some line variation. So if you can, in fact, make the most out of that, and actually get some really nice line variation. So I really like that. As you can see, the pen lays down a decent, even amount of ink. That's really due to the obliqueness of the nib here, because if I move that way, then you see the effect is still there, but this way, of course, moving along with the breadth of the nib gives you a really nice flow of ink. The feed is okay. One can write fairly quickly with it, with the pen. Not being legible, just being quick. As you can see, the feed doesn't skip, because it's a continuous supply of ink. The nib doesn't skip. And yeah, smooth. That's the very word to describe this nib. Then given this nice, slightly flexy feel to it, I'm very happy I was able to get this pen at such an awesome price. So, I hope this was useful, even though this is a vintage pen and not a pen that you will pick up in any shop. But still, I hope it was useful and you've enjoyed this. I thank you for watching, and bye-bye.